Alrighty. What is up, everybody? Welcome to our weekly deep dive. My name is Nick Griffin. I'm the lead pastor here at Wayfarers. I'm accompanied by our teaching pastor here, Noah Randolph. You want to say hi to everybody, Noah?
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
We are, we've been a little frazzled the last few weeks trying to get different things done with the snow and all the crazy weather that we've had here in Memphis, all the snow and ice. So I would say, I think I speak for both of us to say we're very happy to finally be back in our studio, in our office, in our weirdly leaned back, comfy chairs here.
Right.
If this is your first time tuning in for our deep dive, this is just kind of it's a live stream / podcast that we do every week. It's an opportunity for us to go a little bit deeper on some of the topics that we can't get to during the Sunday services, during the sermons especially, and also just an opportunity for us to deal with certain topics that that just take more discussion and more conversation. It's aptly named as a deep dive. We just use it in general to go deeper about topics of the Bible. So if this is your first time tuning in, we're super thankful to have you here. Welcome to the deep dive. If you have been tuning in weekly with us, we are even more excited to see you guys. Thank you for all those of you that watch and listen every week. This week we've got a really, really interesting topic, but before we dive into the topic, we have been doing a segment we call Quirky Queries, where we're asking each other different weird, maybe off-the-wall questions as an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better, and as an opportunity for those of you that are watching or listening to also get to know us better. We're a new church. We're just getting things started, and we figure this is a good opportunity for y'all to get to know the personalities of some of the people that work here at the church a little bit more. So Noah tasked me with coming up with a question this week, and the question is going to be vague. Take it however you want to take it, I guess.
Oh, I love vague questions.
I've mentioned a few times in my sermons that I grew up in the church, grew up in a Christian family. I know you did too, Noah. And we both grew up in this very interesting time in American Christianity, which kind of was the rise of evangelical American cultural media, I will say. So Christian movies, music, CCM music, Christian contemporary music, Christian kids TV shows, Veggie Tales, and all that kind of stuff. Tail end of it, Christian movies and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that media gets kind of hated on by people as being just like not as good as the secular versions of those things. I've talked about a little bit of some of that in my sermons before. But I think there are a few things from the 90s of Christian media that are just like really good, even if like objectively good art is, I guess, what I'm saying. I'm curious what I'm sure I assume you feel that way too, but what is some aspect of 90s Christian culture that you think still holds up? You think it's good. You think even non-Christians would say that it's good. Could be a band, it could be a movie, it could be a TV show, it could be a book.
It's really hard because a lot of that was sort of based in a theology that I completely disagree with now, which is like the Left Behind series and the Frank Peretti and the like all of this like super spiritualism and like the end times could be any day now kind of thing. And so a lot of the art that was happening around that time was very based in all of that. So it's hard to say.
Not all of it necessarily,
any of that could hold up for me.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of what I watched was like a lot of like I watched The Visitation, which was like a movie that Frank Peretti
here let me tell you the reason I thought of this question, because music also fits in this too. My brother Jeremy texted me Monday, and he was just like, do you remember this band? And he texted me a picture, a Spotify link, and it was to a band called 1,000 Foot Crutch.
Yeah.
That me and you have talked about
a lot. Yeah.
Old school Christian band. I was listening to it, and I'm like, you know what? This still rocks. This is still really, really good.
Yeah.
Me and Jeremy were both saying that. It was kind of a nostalgia moment for us, but we were like, you know what? This music holds up, even if it is kind of
it's hard.
cheesy Christian music.
Yeah, it's hard because now it's like every Tooth and Nail album sounds the same to me now, which, I get. It's like a whole mixing technique kind of thing, but like a lot of the stuff was very overcompressed and I didn't know that at the time. And so going back, you can.
So it doesn't hold up for you.
It doesn't hold up for me. I'm sorry. It's one of those things where it's like, I mean, I can be in the right, if I'm in a nostalgic mood, I'll listen to it. But if I'm not in a nostalgic mood, it won't be on my radar. But art, that's a good one that still holds up today. That's a really good question. And I feel like I have to at least have one that I'd say holds up today. I'd probably go with maybe books I read. A lot of books that kind of came out in the early 2000s that were really good, that from a Christian perspective, that I'd still say that I'd go back and read. There's an author, a lot of I don't know if any guy will know of this author, but I know a lot of women have read this author, Francine Rivers. She has a series, a book in particular called The Last Sin Eater. That's like a historical fiction book, and that book in particular was, I think, written around the 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah.
And that book, I could go back and read that today. I really like that book a lot. So
Still holds up.
Still holds up to me. Yeah. And the movie, there's actually a movie of it that I watched around that time too. And it's kind of cheesy, but I'd say that that's a movie that holds up today. Music wise, Rich Mullins. Rich Mullins holds up today. I love Rich Mullins, and anything that he did, I'll still listen to. It's obviously very 80s influence, but
right.
I can still listen to Awesome God and Jesus Creed and just anything that he did. So yeah, those are the two that I'd give you.
Those are good.
Yeah.
I've heard of Francine Rivers. I have not read any of those books. So
yeah, she's big.
No, those are great answers.
She's
I agree. Rich Mullins is. See, I was not. I did not listen to Rich Mullins back then. Okay. So I discovered Rich Mullins like a year ago, which my old roommate Jordan would be appalled to hear me say that, because Rich Mullins was like his favorite musician. But I super agree with that. Rich Mullins is one of those musicians whose music definitely still holds up. Yeah. So no, that's
and I would say, like, I didn't watch this movie until I was 18, but I don't know when Ragamuffin came out, but Ragamuffin's really good.
Well, that's why I got into Rich Mullins. I watched that movie,
Ragamuffin? Okay.
and which is a biopic about Rich Mullins, and it is great. It's also, I'd say that's also a pretty good Christian indie film.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's probably one of the better ones, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
What about you? Well,
answers.
you've already answered. You said 1,000-Foot Crutch and
Veggie Tales.
Veggie Tales. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I was Veggie Tales, for those of you that don't know. I assume if people tune in might know, but
shoot, I forgot about one. I've got to say one real quick.
Which
Adventures in Odyssey.
You've talked about Adventures in Odyssey.
If anyone
before.
Does not know about the thing that's called Adventures in Odyssey, I don't agree with everything that Focus on the Family stands for, and their doctrines are not things that I necessarily agree with as much anymore. But they have a guy that wrote most of the episodes for their series from albums 1 to 50 called Paul McCusker, and he is actually a journalist before he was even involved with Adventures in Odyssey, and he's just an incredible writer. He's awesome. One of the hands down. There's nothing that comes close to the storytelling that he tells. So yeah.
So Adventures in Odyssey was a children's story series, like audiobooks almost. It's like a serial.
It's audio drama.
Audio
drama.
And they had a TV show for a little bit too.
Yeah, they had a TV show and some movies that aren't as good. I will say it's really the audio drama is where it's at. that. But
Yeah.
they
Good
also
old cassette tapes in the car and whatnot.
Yeah, they also did the whole Chronicles of Narnia. The Focus on the Family did with Paul McCosker, also did all the Chronicles of Narnia on audio drama, and they did Screw Tape Letters on audio drama. And Andy Serkis is Screw Tape in that one. So if you're like into Gollum and you want to hear Gollum, do Screw Tape. It's really good.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what Adventures in Odyssey. Veggie Tales was a children's TV series, movie, like little short animated series based around vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought of that recently because there was always these interludes, these silly songs with Larry, they called them, in between the episodes and stuff. And we were trying to calm my son Toby down the other day. He was crying and needed something to kind of distract him, and so I pulled up Silly Songs with Larry and was playing them for him. And they're still super funny, man. It still holds up. It was great.
Oh yeah, no, they're great.
So yeah, those would be my answers. We could do a whole. Obviously, for me, the nostalgia is mixed in a little bit too. So I don't know how objective I can be on some of this one way or another. But I still think a lot of those things hold up. It wasn't all bad. So, for our topic for today, the reason I wanted to kind of do this in a deep dive, we're going to be looking at two really famous passages of Jesus. We've been doing the Sermon on the Mount in our sermon series. So we've been looking at Jesus's most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, and just looking at some of the different passages and commands he gives us in the sermon, and trying to really go deep on each of them. And so it's been like 1 or 2 verses a week at this rate. We are moving very slowly, but just really trying to get everything we can out of the sermon.
I think as it should be too. I mean, this is like the basics of Christian morality, so we
take our time. We don't want to skim through it.
Yeah.
And so this last Sunday, I preached on a very interesting section of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus tells his followers he doesn't want them to take oaths or to swear on anything. Something that always seemed kind of out of place for me in the sermon. I was like, why is that a thing that he's concerned about? But as I was reading it, as I was studying it and thinking about it myself, I really think that Jesus' main point is he just wants his disciples to be so truthful, so honest, so trustworthy as people themselves that they don't need to swear on anything. I was kind of thinking of the example of the boy who cried wolf, the story of the boy who constantly lies about a wolf coming, and then when the reality comes, nobody believes him. People who lie all the time, people who aren't trustworthy, those are the kind of people that need to like swear an oath so that you believe them. And I think Jesus is saying, just let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Be a truthful, honest person who doesn't need to swear. And I think my point in that is that I think a big part of that is a lot of what Jesus is asking of his followers is he's trying to shape their character in such a way so that when they are telling other people about the good news of the kingdom of God and of Jesus, they'll believe them, and it's sort of an evangelistic purpose is kind of what I'm thinking. He has kind of an evangelistic hope for a lot of it. And I think these next two sections that follow that section on oaths kind of go with that together. And so they're the sections where Jesus talks about turning the other cheek and going the extra mile, phrases that we use in our everyday language all the time. And I think most people know they come from the Bible, but they may not. It may just have been a phrase we use all the time, turn the other cheek, go the extra mile. But they are actually from the Bible, and actually specifically from the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. So I wanted to read them, and then we can kind of get into what I wanted to talk about with these today. So these are in Matthew chapter 5. Again, he just finished the section on oaths. And then Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." This passage, like I said, It's pretty famous. A lot of people have heard it. And it's one of those that I think everyone feels like they know what it means. But as far as when it comes to living it out, I find a lot of people making a lot of exceptions on whether they live it out or not. And I myself have been really thinking through and trying to really understand this passage for the last several months pretty intensely myself, just because I've been trying to figure out where to draw the line, or if I even should draw the line on enacting some of the things that Jesus says here. And because I haven't got my thoughts fully figured out on a lot of it, I didn't feel like comfortable preaching it, so to speak. I wanted to just kind of use this as an opportunity to talk through it a little bit, talk through a little bit of what I'm thinking, and, maybe just kind of hash out our thoughts as we kind of go along. So before we go into that, though, I want to make a few points, just a few things I have noticed as I've been reading through this passage. One is that Jesus starts in the same way he always starts all his a lot of the major sections here on the Sermon on the Mount, with this phrase, "You have heard it said." And so he's referencing back mostly to the Old Testament law. So he's saying, "You've heard it said, ... And then he contrasts it, though, with, "But I say to you." And so he's contrasting an Old Testament law with something, the law of Christ is what I've been saying, the building blocks of Christian morality, like you said, Noah.
Yeah.
I was kind of interested to find out as I was studying it that when Jesus says, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth," there is a couple of Old Testament laws that reference that, that say that line. Do you know where those are? It's like Deuteronomy, probably.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
But either way, there's a couple of Old Testament laws that mention that exact same phrase. But it was really interesting. I found out that this was not something exclusive to the Bible. Hammurabi's code, which is a famous Babylonian law code, also includes almost this exact same phrase, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And there's a lot of ancient law codes that can be dated even to like before the time of the Bible that have that phrase in it. And it just really generally explains this idea of like, whatever you do to me, I'm going to do back to you. We keep it fair, we keep it even.
Right.
If you hurt me in some way where you take away my eye, I get to take your eye as well.
Leviticus 24:19 through 21.
All right. Leviticus 24:19 through 21 is where it comes up in the Old Testament. But like I said, it comes up in lots of other places. So, and it's this law of reciprocity, is what they call it. So I'm going to do the same thing to you that you do back to me. One of those things that in general sounds pretty basic, pretty fair, like, yeah, why would you have any issue with that? Why would that be something that anybody would have any thoughts on?
There's even an older one that's kind of the same way, where the first laws about murder is like, he who sheds murder sheds a man's blood, his blood shall also be shed. It's kind of the eye for an eye kind of thing as well. So
so it's like a general concept or a general principle, I guess, that is just present
in the Old Testament,
throughout the whole Old Testament. And it's one of those that's, so obviously that's what Jesus is referencing. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's, you've heard it said. But he contrasts it and he says, "I actually tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If they want to sue you, take your shirt, give them your coat as well. And if they force you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles." As I read it, it seems like a big part of what he's saying is that he wants Christians to be the kind of people who are going to not just take revenge and do things back to people to the same level that they would do them to you, but he actually wants he wants Christians to go above and beyond, give them more than what they deserve, in a good way, So like if they slap you, you don't slap them back. You give them the other cheek. You say, here, go ahead and slap this one too. If they say they're going to sue you and take your shirt, you say, that's fine. Here, take this coat as well. And this idea of if they force you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. It's that concept, especially my preacher growing up used to bring up a point that this is probably related to a practice that was common in the first century of Roman military, like Roman soldiers. They had these big, heavy packs that they would carry around with them. And the way Roman law was set up, they were allowed to, when they were in these provinces outside of Rome, whether it's Judea and Israel or other places, they were allowed to just pick a random citizen and make this by law that citizen was required to carry that soldier's pack at least 1 mile.
Mm-hmm.
And the Romans were famous for these very well developed road systems, and so they had mile markers. They were the first ones that developed mile markers, those little stakes in the ground that show exactly 1 mile. And they said part of the reason they did that was so that this law could be fulfilled. And so they said, you can kind of imagine a soldier, you're just working in the field one day, a soldier walks up and he says, hey, boy, come over here, carry my pack. So he'd give him carry it 1 mile. So you'd look at the mile marker, you would carry it for him 1 mile, and it says, you can imagine, as soon as you get to that second mile marker, they're throwing it off and running off because they have fulfilled their legal responsibility. They can't. That's what the law says. You carry 1 mile. That's what they do. And so it's crazy. Jesus is saying, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and do 2, though. And you can imagine the Israelites who hated the Romans are sitting there hearing, are you serious? You're telling me that if they force me to go 1 mile, I should actually go 2? And then he ends it with just this very interesting thing of like, give to anyone who wants to borrow from you. This kind of like financial idea almost.
Yeah.
And so overall, I think the way I've always understood it is that the general principle is that Christians should not be the kind of people that are looking to get even. They shouldn't be the kind of people that are looking to if you hurt me, I'm not looking to hurt you back. I'm actually looking to forgive you and to maybe give you grace and give you gifts and give you more than what you deserve. In general, Christians should not be the kind of people who are keeping score, trying to say, I did this for you, you should do this for me. I think the principle here is that Christians should be the kind of people that are just giving more and more, especially to people who don't deserve it. The problem, all of that sounds great.
Yeah.
Nice. I don't know that anybody would disagree with that. The problem has come up recently, and I've seen it kind of more and more, as I've had conversations with different people, especially surrounding issues of politics, but also, I guess, just surrounding the issues going on in our society these days. And one of the questions a lot of people have is, where do you draw the line on that, on turning the other cheek? If somebody breaks into your house and is trying to kill you, do you just step back and let them do it? If they're robbing you, do you just let them rob you? Or would you be justified in grabbing a gun if you have it and shooting the robber? Would you be justified in retaliating in any way? And I've heard arguments both ways, basically. Some people saying that to retaliate would be to go against what Jesus is saying here. It would be to go back to the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth side of things. And then I've heard other people say that, no, that there's like a line. They draw a distinction. They make draw a line between the two. And like I said, I kind of flip-flop back and forth at different points in time as I've thought through the issues. There was one particular situation I had, or really 2 examples I had in mind that were stories that really impacted me, that were forcing me more into the just like the overall, I guess we'd say, just total pacifism side. Never take revenge, never fight back, anything. One is a story I've referenced a few times in sermons of, there's a story called the Spirit of the Rainforest, which is a story of a missionary group, Christian missionary group that goes to a remote tribe in the Amazon rainforest. And basically, this is a group of tribes that have been fighting for hundreds of years at this point. And as the missionaries convert one particular town, one particular tribe, that tribe collectively decides they're no longer going to fight back. They're just going to, if the other tribes come and attack them, they're going to let them. They're just going to wait till they leave. They will rebuild. They won't take revenge. They won't fight back. They won't resist an evil person, as Jesus says. And the story is incredible as Spirit of the Rainforest goes. I would encourage any of you to go read the book. But basically, this tribe, by deciding to not fight back, kind of single-handedly changes their entire community. All of the tribes around them. Everyone is just shocked at this tribe that does not fight back. And it makes a huge difference. It seems to me a bigger difference that would have been made if they had fought back. The other story I heard was of a guy who I knew who did prison ministries. He would go into prisons and do ministry with the people in prison. And there was one particular man who was in for gang violence and a whole bunch of different things like that, who was converted through this prison ministry. He became a Christian. And he became convinced that as a Christian, it meant he didn't need to fight back inside the prisons at all anymore. And it was kind of a graphic, difficult story, but I mean, he was talking about how in prison people will get raped and, like all kinds of other things will happen. And usually it's all about like sticking up for yourself and fighting back and making yourself big and making yourself tough. And he just came to the conclusion that he wasn't going to fight back. He wasn't going to do any of that. And he kind of told his story and was very adamant about his belief that that is what Jesus was calling him to do. Both of those were very impactful for me. And in general, I've wanted to kind of lean towards that direction. I think my personality would lean towards that sort of pacifism. But I will admit, I still have heard some good arguments for drawing a line in the sand somewhere where you're not just going to fully turn the other cheek one way or another. So those have been my general thoughts on that. It's a long diatribe.
No,
but,
it's good.
I've been thinking through all those different issues. What have you thought about this passage? We've talked a little bit about this off camera and at different points in time. But what's been your experience with this particular passage, Noah?
Yeah, it's hard because I've always seen this I've always seen this passage kind of weaponized against the black community a lot of the time, just because of the tendency, just with our current political system. There have been a lot of, hate thrown at that black community for that, just the ways that they've expressed outrage at injustice. And so, it just, a lot of times when I come to this verse now, I just feel I'm waiting for, people to sort of just immediately start pointing the finger at other people, and, I have... Yeah,
it's really common for people to say, you're not turning the other cheek. You're not doing what Jesus said. Yeah, look, you're fighting back. You're not turning the other cheek.
And I understand that, like, as like a pastor or something like that, that's kind of your role, is to do that. But at the same time, I've often felt that, if people pointed at other people with the same amount of enthusiasm as they examine their own lives, they might, think twice. And especially some people that are in the position that feel like they would stand up against someone that invaded their home or something like that. If you're in that camp, then I would question whether or not you should have such a loud voice against the African American community and some of their protests. And so I just want to say that from the outset. That's just kind of how I feel. That might offend some people. I'm sorry. We can talk about that, but it's just, I've come to the conviction that Jesus is not necessarily just coming down on this in a spiritual way, like this really this passage matters to how we live our lives in a very practical way, and it matters politically. It matters, to everything. So, I do want to bring that up.
Absolutely, because I think part of the reason this really feels like kind of the center of the Sermon on the Mount to me.
Yeah,
this section right here is where a lot of it comes to a
head.
And one of the biggest things I think people would be honest that they would, I think what they're saying they feel when they read the Sermon on the Mount, most people would say, is just, that's not fair.
Yeah.
That's what, that's not fair. It's not fair. If someone hits me on the cheek, I shouldn't turn the other cheek. That's not fair. If they're forcing me to go 1 mile, why should I go another mile? That's not fair. A lot of what Jesus says in this section especially, it feels like could be the easiest response is just to immediately say, oh, that's not fair. And that's conflicting for us. That's difficult for us because as Christians especially, we believe God is a God of justice and fairness.
Right.
So it feels like a contradiction of terms. It's like, how can God be a God of justice, of fairness, but then also ask us to turn the other cheek, to go the extra mile, to lend to anyone who would ask to borrow.
Right. And we have a lot of, it's interesting from an Old Testament perspective. There are multiple times where you see people fitting on kind of this both sides of the coin almost. Like David, for instance, is someone that throughout his entire life serving God, David's giving more like time in the Bible. He's like the third most person that gets the most space in the Bible. It's Jesus, Moses, and then David. And David, most of his life is a life of eye for eye, tooth for tooth kind of thing. He spends most of his life killing Philistines, killing Amorites, just and really establishing the kingdom that is Israel. And if you read 1 Samuel, the Lord is behind all of this. But what's interesting is at the same time, he will not kill before he gets to that position, before he becomes the king. He is being pursued by the king of Israel, Saul. And the way the story goes is he's given the opportunity twice to kill King Saul. And he doesn't take the opportunity. And so it's very interesting that, in one sense, David is... the Bible upholds David as this morally upright man, but
who is an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth guy.
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth guy. But then when he's actually presented with a opportunity to advance himself,
it's not like Saul was this super awesome great guy. At
Saul
the moment, Saul is trying to kill David.
Saul is from most accounts even. That the Bible seems to indicate he might have even been demon possessed. And so there is this sense in which David could have been justified for ending his life. And he doesn't. But what's interesting is even given all that later on when David wants to build a house for God, God tells him, I'm not going to allow you to do that, because you've got blood on your hands.
Yeah. That was the as you were talking, that's immediately what I thought of. Because I think people who are like, no, I should be able to defend myself, I should be able to fight back, will point to David, or to other Old Testament people. You might point to the Exodus, might point to the and they'll say, see, they were doing what God wanted them to do.
Right.
But it is really interesting whenever David it gets to this point to where he's going to build the temple and build a home for God, a house for God. God tells him you can't because you have blood on your hands. You're
a man of war.
A man of war. And so it's only his son, David's son later, that gets to
build
it because he's not that person. And so I don't know, that could be one thing we could kind of get out of it. What Jesus is calling us to is that ultimate ideal of not being people with blood on our hands.
Yeah. And
could be one way you could argue it.
And I guess the whole reason I bring all this up is to say, I find that when you look at individual storylines like David, or you look at Joshua, or you look at some of these people that, I think in some senses Peter is kind of the New Testament example of someone that like wants to take on the Roman government and is very military minded, and in John he hacks off the ear of a priest that's about to arrest Jesus. These people seem to have these stories in which they're very much in some sense think they're following after the Lord, and oftentimes God even asks them to do these things. And what I've found as reading more and more of those stories has been that it's not a clear one for one, this is right, this is wrong kind of thing. It seems to me as if God works with specific people in whatever circumstances they are, holding them to an ideal that they may or may not be able to achieve based off of what they're dealing with in their current moment. So it's like, I don't know if David could have lived the life of Solomon, right? Because David had so many enemies that were surrounding him, right? And so in some sense, David followed after God with all his heart, and when given the opportunity, he did spare Saul, but he still had to fight all these people because that otherwise they were going to overwhelm Israel, and
right.
So, but it's like, and I don't think God faults David for that. I don't think that God looks at David and says that you were someone that in some sense is like a sinner or anything. But I do think that in God saying, I don't want you to build a temple, he's saying you are not the full perfect, you're not where I want humanity to get to, like you had to deal with these circumstances, and we've progressed in these circumstances, but you're not where I want the person to build the temple to be, and so I don't know. I think we think of it in binaries of like, oh, David was awful for doing all of that and creating all this bloodshed and things like that, or we think, oh, it's fine, like we just give him a free pass, and I don't think that the binary is really what's kind of being depicted in those stories. It seems as if God's way more interested in spending time with a situation than like a broad, is this right or wrong, and working with people towards developing them, I think, to these moral ideals. I do think that they are ultimately getting to the point that we should all be getting there. We should be getting to the point where we are Solomons that can live in peace and, never, I would agree with your point of, I think that a lot of Christians just sort of like say, well, that's impossible in our time and we just can't do this, so we're just, or make up excuses for why they can't follow these passages. But
in general, that's kind of been my frustration with the entire Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
Most of my life I've heard all of these passages regularly. And one of my frustrations with Christianity in general is that there's a lot, it's really easy to Google any passage that's difficult, any passage that seems like it's hard, any passage that you don't agree with. And you'll find somebody who's telling you, well, Jesus, he didn't really mean that, though.
Yeah.
In this situation, he didn't mean that, though. And I am frustrated with that lots of times, because sometimes I think Jesus really did mean the hard thing that people want to say he did not mean.
Yeah.
But I have been able to recognize that there are a few times where I have maybe misunderstood what Jesus is saying, or where he is kind of situationally allowing for some flexibility. And so I'm just trying to make sure that this isn't one of those times where where maybe there's a little bit more flexibility. It's not just as black and white.
Yeah,
as it might
that's what I'm getting at, is like, I think this is an issue where it's really situationally based. But what I've come to believe with a lot of the Sermon on the Mount is he's establishing what the kingdom of God will be, and it should be, and so in some sense it's like, this is what humans will become, right? This is what we also should be working towards now, yes, but it's also a promise of the future, right? And so, in many ways, I see these verses as like sort of allowing us a window into a time when everybody will, just turn the other cheek, and everybody will run the extra mile, and everybody will give out money whenever someone needs to borrow. I think in some sense it's in Jesus setting up these moral ideals for what it's like in the kingdom. The imagining that world for the Jews, I think the Jews were imagining a world in which they were on top and the Romans were underneath their feet, right? And so for him to upend that table and to paint a different picture for what it's like, what the kingdom of God is like, I think that's really what he's getting at here. And so sometimes I wonder if we get too caught up in the weeds of can we or can we not do this, and think less about like the promise of what will happen eventually, like what he is, because he opens this up with kingdom stuff. Like this is all about like, blessed are people that are in this camp. Blessed, to me, I think the Sermon on the Mount is less of a, I definitely think that it's asking people to live lives differently. I'm not saying it's not, but I am saying that I think there's a second dimension to it where he's explaining what heaven is going to be like, and like how people like,
here's my issue with that, especially with this passage. Yeah. Because he says, do not resist an evil person.
Right.
The definition of heaven is that there are no evil people there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that he's describing some sort of future ideal, because you can't resist an evil person in heaven because the evil people don't make it there.
Right,
they go somewhere else.
Right. No, and that's a fair point.
The idea that Jesus means turn the other cheek, well, we're not really going to be able to do that until heaven.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to turn the other cheek in heaven. There's no evil people. So to me, this passage especially feels like a here and now command, because he's actually talking about how you deal with corrupt, evil people.
Yeah. And I would agree with you there. What I'm saying is that I'm thinking more of like what it takes in a human being to be able to get to that point, so to speak. Like, I think that to be able to look, anybody in the eye that, afflicted you with pain or suffering, and to be able to turn the other cheek, or to, even love that person, which is where we're going to get to in your next sermon, to be able to get to that point requires a element of human forgiveness that I don't think just comes naturally, I guess. Right. At least I think that in some sense that's what I'm talking about more so.
So you don't think we can do that until heaven?
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm saying that because I believe that like the kingdom of heaven is now,
Right.
So like I don't necessarily think that like all of this is just put off until like one day.
Yeah.
Like I believe that we are Christians are people that actually kind of are small fragments of heaven in a sense.
Right.
Like we are people that show what heaven will one day be like in the now. And, a lot of people have talked about like the kingdom of heaven is in the engagement period currently, where it's like we're pledged to be married to Jesus, but the marriage hasn't happened yet, so to speak. And so it's all these ideas of like Christians now have a capacity, I do think, to begin the process of living that kind of life, but I'm just not certain that I'm not. I just know I can know for me is that it would take me a long time if someone were to harm me in a very deep and wounding way to live up to this passage.
Right.
It just would take me a long time. And I think having the wisdom to be, and the kindness and the gentleness that comes also with Christianity, to be cautious about people that are in that situation.
Sure.
And like, I wouldn't take this verse and like immediately if they've been afflicted by something. I wouldn't
tell them, hey,
remember Jesus said this. You know, like I think that
Sure.
the sense is that this is something that we want to work towards.
Right.
You know, but maybe in a very progressive and slow way. And that to me has been, you know, I was thinking about this with people. This is how counselors work too,
Mm-hmm.
where they don't necessarily just tell you everything that you need to know about how to fix yourself.
Right.
They slowly let you figure things out on your own through questioning and through conversations and things like that. And so I think that's where I land now with this, is that yes, I think it's an ideal to live up to, but I wouldn't necessarily go out and just, you know, beat people over the head with it. And I definitely wouldn't specifically single out a specific race and tell them that, you know.
For sure.
And
I can definitely resonate with where your heart is there. And I don't think I would want to do that either. My issue is more with, there are groups of Christians who would not say, I'm working towards that, I just can't get that here, you know. But there are specific groups of Christians who would say, no, it would be wrong for me to not fight back right now. They have specific situations they have in mind that they believe it would actually be sin for them not to fight back, you know.
To let it have its way.
Right.
Is a sin.
The argument they make is that if you don't fight back, then evil will run rampant, you know. Which makes sense to me. You know, that's an argument that I can understand. But
if you, I mean, by that argument, then Jesus sinned because Jesus allowed evil to crucify him.
what's that? Yeah.
I mean, like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, because, like, you know, Jesus allowed people to arrest him. He allowed people to try him unjustly.
Right.
He allowed people to crucify him.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, if you're going to make the argument that
you should never let evil people get away with it.
You should never let people get away with things, and that's a sin, then Jesus sinned in that moment by doing that. So I would disagree with that.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to kind of go back at that, I guess. But, you know, that's kind of abstractly. Practically speaking, it is where it comes up a lot. You know, just thinking through situations. Somebody could be like, what if someone breaks into my house and they're stealing stuff from me, and I am there, I catch them in the act, I own a gun, or something. What, you know, pastorally, put on your pastor hat. What would you say to somebody who is
part of me
that?
When people talk about this one in particular, part of me just wants to ask them, like, which are they more afraid of? You know, losing their things, losing their life. You know, like a lot of times it's like, my fear is that oftentimes people make decisions about this issue based off of fear, more so than conviction. So, you know, they fear that person.
They might fear
harming them in a really awful way, or they fear that person stealing several of their things, or they fear that person taking their life, you know. And so, you know, they start with this fear of either losing material wealth or losing their life or suffering some pain in some way. You know, those are the three things that I've heard argued is either they're going to hurt me really badly, 2, they're going to take my stuff, or 3, they're going to take my life. And from those 3 things, they then make the argument, I can't let any of these 3 things happen. So I have a right to defend myself, right? And my conviction is that, like, if that's the only reason for why you're justifying taking out a gun and shooting the person, then that's a very secular conviction. You know, it's a conviction in which you valued your life as the highest thing, your wealth as the highest thing, or your personal safety as the highest thing. And again, it's really hard to have these conversations because as humans we're all
theoretical.
Well, no, as humans we're all naturally, I think, wired to keep ourselves safe, keep ourselves from harm. And I do see that, you can even see it in like some of the things that Paul says, where he says, like, if the gospel's not true, then we are the most to be pitied. And he seems to be implying that, like, not only are we fools, but we're also to be pitied because we like are living a life that is really kind of sucks, for this thing if it's not true, and it's amazing how many passages you'll find in the New Testament where suffering and where all these different things that kind of are guarantees in the Christian life, and I guess I'm more and more convinced that when people say that they would take out the gun and shoot, they're not shooting the guy because they're a Christian. They're shooting the guy because they're afraid for their own life, and I would want someone that does believe that, not necessarily to change their mind, but I'd want them to at least come up with a very Christian reason for why they would do that, that doesn't have to do with personal safety, with their own life, and with, even, I've heard some people make the argument of like, well, what if, they, were to attack someone else in the house, my family or something like that. That seems it seems like you're looking out for the needs of other people. But again, it's like, at what point are you making that call that your family's in danger? Are you making that call the minute they enter the door? Are you making that call the moment that they pull out the gun and aim it at one of the people in your family? It seems as if you're making the assumption that it's already going to be the worst before they even enter the house. It seems as if you've already, to make a pun here, jumped the gun. And it's like, for me at least, if we're going to come down on one side of this debate, I would rather come down on the side in which I offered too much mercy than too much judgment, because I am really convinced that how I judge is how God will judge me. I think you find some verses in the Bible. So
it actually comes up in the Sermon on the Mount. It's a few verses from now. Jesus will say, the measure you use to judge other people.
Right. So if we were to take this scenario, like, I have walked into the throne room of God and I have sin in my life, and I've offended him in the deepest way possible because I've walked into the throne room of God with sin in my life. Do I want God to pull a gun on me, and immediately shoot me without any hesitation? Or do I want God to look at me and consider where I'm at? And, 100% of the time I would want God to consider all the options before pulling that trigger, And so for me, Christian-wise, I would say the same thing in the cases that we live in our own lives. So I don't know. Hopefully that makes some sense,
Yeah. I think you're hitting the nail on the head, though, is exactly kind of what the...
it's a push-pull. And again, this is why I think it's a very progressive thing. This is why I wouldn't come down very hard on people on it. Just to tell a story from my own personal life, I had a very, very heavily conflicting argument with someone in my family over this, and like it was probably one of the worst arguments we've had, just because I was very much on the pacifist side of the fence. This person was very much not so, and so like it was a big conflict between the two, and I just realized that like my own convictions on it were going to be probably different, and my my inner journey with this issue was going to be probably different. I'd come from a different concept, and I don't know every situation. Like, I've never been in war, and I've never been in situations where I've felt safety-wise that bad,
Yeah.
And so, like, it's hard to judge a situation like this without every single piece of the equation, but I try and have as much grace for everybody on this topic. The only thing that the only people I don't have grace for are people that really just come down hard on other people in a way that doesn't seem loving or kind or gentle. That's the only time I don't really have grace with this issue. But I do think it's a call that Jesus is asking us to do. I think if you at least have to say that this is an ideal that he wants us to do, and that he lived it, And you can look at his journey to the cross and you can see that he lived it, and that he reprimanded Peter when Peter tried to live a different way.
Right.
And
because when he comes to be arrested, Peter pulls out his sword and tries to fight back.
Yeah.
And Jesus tells him,
No, don't do that. And so I think at some level you have to acknowledge that part of the Christian goal. And there's one passage I did want to bring up, because there's a passage in Revelation where it kind of gives the people that have been put in that situation and killed their moment of triumph.
Yeah.
Revelation's an intense book, but one of the interesting things about it is there's a passage where these martyrs come back after they've been killed, in the world. And where is it? I'm going to have to Google the memory verse here. But basically, they've been killed in real life, for the faith. They've been martyred, and many of them unjustly, right? And part of me has wondered, like, would there not be more martyrs today if we weren't as security conscious, And
right.
Of course, everybody loves a martyr but doesn't want to be a martyr, and it's that it's that hard thing of, like, deciding that. But in Revelation, I'm trying to remember Revelation 6, 9 through 11. Sorry. Yeah. When he opened so this is in the middle of a bunch of seals that the Lamb of God, this would be Christ, is what we think this is opening. And on the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who have been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. And then it goes on to the sixth seal. And it seems interesting to me that, like, the reason that judgment's not happening yet is because not enough Christians have been killed yet.
Right.
Like, that's the reason.
Right.
And yeah, I just think that obviously Revelation holds these Christians to such a high standard, and that they are going to be the ones that, they're under the altar of, I assume, burnt offering. I don't actually know on that one. If anyone knows what the altar is, I'd be curious. But just this image of people that have been slain wrongfully being avenged by God later on at the end.
Right.
It seems to be the motif of the Revelation, is that, like, you don't, in our lifetime, we don't seek out to save ourselves. We lose our lives, for the sake of Christ, and then God will avenge us one day, and that's kind of like he who seeks to save his life will lose it, right?
Yeah.
But whoever loses his life for my sake saves it,
Right.
Like, I think a lot of people take that spiritually, but like, you could kind of apply that literally too.
Yeah.
So,
and that is kind of what that is, I think, part of the purpose that Revelation is supposed to serve.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because historically, at the moment Revelation, the vision was given to John and went out to those churches,
mm-hmm.
was during a time where they were getting persecuted and killed and martyred
Yeah.
for all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I do think that's one of the encouragements, weirdly, we're supposed to get out of Revelation, even though it's such a weird book, is that God is going to make things right eventually.
Yeah.
And so a big part of what Jesus is asking us here is not, don't punish them, don't worry about it, let them get away with it.
Yeah.
But it is, you turn the other cheek, you go the extra mile, you show grace, mercy, the gifts of God to them. And like I said, it kind of goes with the be truthful, and all of it, I think, is supposed to create a character and a kind of person that will be like winsome and that people will want to know what you're on about.
Yeah.
And when they get to know you and they get to know the good message of the kingdom, then, they might be like Zacchaeus, where they turn around and they pay back every wrong that they've done. And they, they come back and they make it up to you tenfold or something like that. That would be so much better than you having to go out and eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, take it back for yourself. But ultimately, I think a good encouragement that we can just end on here is just that, however we feel about this, one thing we can bank on, one thing we know for sure, is that God is just. God's going to do what's right. And eventually, those who have not turned away and turned to him, evil people will get what's coming to them. People who deserve what they deserve will get what's coming to them. God's going to make things right. God's going to make things fair. But in the meantime, he is calling us to a very high ideal and a standard, which is tough. Like, it is something cool to live up to. So, like I said, we weren't planning on trying to get it all figured out, but, hopefully we've talked through a few things, given you some things to think about. Would encourage you to tune in this Sunday for two different things. One, I am getting an opportunity to go preach in Sunday morning at my home church, Eastwind Christian Church. So if you want to look up Eastwind Christian Church on Facebook, you can see me preach there Sunday morning. And if you're not awake at 10:30 in the morning and you just want to watch the evening service, I would encourage you to tune into our Wayfarers Christian Church Sunday evening stream at 7 o'clock, also on Facebook and on YouTube the next day. You can find out a little bit more as we kind of continue through this series on the Sermon on the Mount. I'm real excited about the sermon this Sunday, and I'm excited about that opportunity to go back to my old home church and get to preach there too. So yeah, should be pretty cool. Either way, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you this Sunday and next week for our following deep dive. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.